Welcome to the deep dive. And today we're tackling a case that I think we all find pretty unsettling, Ted Bundy. We're going to try to really get into the psychology of his crimes and unpack whether all the stuff we have now, modern forensic science, criminal profiling, all that, could it have actually stopped him? Or are we really dealing with, someone so cunning, so devious that someone like him could still rise to infamy in today's world? We've got a crazy amount of research, articles, firsthand accounts, even just reading about how Bundy kept some of his victims' skulls, like actual trophies. That's just chilling. So to help us navigate all this, I've got our expert in criminal psychology and forensic analysis here.
It's certainly, it's a fascinating case and terrifying at the same time, to be sure.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess to kick things off, let's talk about the man, the actual person behind the monster, so to speak. Who was Ted Bundy beneath all that? Outwardly, we're talking about a law student, seemingly charming dude, even volunteered for a suicide hotline. Not really screaming, serial killer.
Right. And that's really what made Bundy so dangerous, this duality. He was a master at manipulation, projecting this image of normalcy, But underneath, profound darkness. Professor Whittaker's research, he calls them successful psychopaths, and this dissonance is its common thread he found. They blend in seamlessly, appear harmless, often even charming, but all while just completely violating social norms and without a shred of guilt.
It's just wild to think, here's this guy working on a political campaign, right? And at the same time committing these absolutely horrific murders. It's almost impossible to reconcile those two realities. And the truly scary part, he almost got away with it. Those prison escapes the courthouse, then the prison itself. It makes you wonder how much of that cunning, was just him. Was it always there? I mean, we've all heard those stories from his childhood, the gyves around his aunt, the animal cruelty. Are those early warning signs? If we see that, are those telltale signs of a psychopath in the making?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, those behaviors, they're disturbing, no doubt. But, correlation doesn't equal causation. There's no one thing, no foolproof predictor that means someone's, destined to become a psychopath. Could those incidents be early manifestations of something darker? Yeah, maybe. But there are always other factors at play.
So, a lot of kids might do some, let's say, challenging things, but very, very few end up like Ted Bundy, which I guess brings us to, the chilling details of his crimes. Can you, for people who don't know, break down his typical MO? What did he do? How to get his victims?
So Bundy, he often used this ruse of vulnerability. He'd act like he was the one in distress, fake an injury, use a fake cast, crutches, anything to appear harmless and in need of help. And that tactic, combined with, gotta admit, he had charisma, it disarmed people, made them, more likely to want to help. He'd, ask for help with stuff that seemed totally normal, carrying books, loading his car, and then it would turn sinister fast.
Yeah, it's scary how effective that was.
Yeah.
We all know about Bundy's Volkswagen. It's almost as intimate as he is.
Right, and he even took it a step further, removed the passenger seat from his car. So he had this space to hide his victims, which, that level of detail, that's chilling. It shows he planned, he prepared, took steps to minimize his own risk. It's a level of calculation that's, it goes way beyond just, some crime of passion.
So it's he was thinking about this, planning it out. It wasn't just a spur of the moment thing, which makes his, the fact that he killed in multiple states even more terrifying. He starts in Washington, then Utah, Colorado. But why Florida? Was it just, trying to get away, or was there something more to it?
Well, Florida, it's got a transient population, the party atmosphere, might have given Bundy that anonymity he was looking for, a way to blend in. But his crimes in Florida, different, more brazen, more frenzied. The attacks at the Chi Omega sorority house just 2 weeks after escaping prison. By the way, 4 women, attacked within minutes, 2 dead, the others horrific injuries. This wasn't just about keeping a low profile, not anymore. This was Bundy acting on these increasingly violent impulses.
So he wasn't running away. He was almost like he was seeking out places that let him indulge these urges. God, it's chilling. Makes you wonder how many other victims are out there that we don't know about.
You've hit on a really important point, this idea of the dark figure of crime. It's basically the reality that some crimes, a lot of crimes maybe, go unreported, unsolved. Criminologist Matt DeLisi, he argues that Bundy's, as horrible as his confirmed victim count is, it's probably just a fraction of the real number.
That's a truly terrifying thought, to think that we may never know the true scope of what he did.
It really highlights how limited we are relying on records when we're trying to understand someone like Bundy.
Okay, so to get into the why of all this, We have to talk about Bundy's psychology, right? He was diagnosed as a psychopath, but what does that actually mean in his case? Like, how did it show up in his life, in his crimes?
Psychopath, it's a term, you hear it thrown around a lot, but with Bundy, it was a clinical diagnosis. All the classic traits were there: superficial charm, no empathy whatsoever, pathological lying, manipulative, and a chilling lack of remorse. I mean, zero. But Bundy was more than just a psychopath. He was also diagnosed with necrophilia, which is a sexual attraction to corpses, and sadism, meaning he enjoyed inflicting pain. That combination, those three things together, it paints a picture of someone, well, fundamentally different from most human beings.
It's almost like trying to understand something totally alien to us. Like, was he born evil? Or did something make him that way?
The nature versus nurture debate, and it's one that still fascinates and baffles everyone, really. We know Bundy's past was troubled, to say the least. Abusive grandfather, the shame surrounding his mother's hidden identity. Those things, those leave a mark, no question. But were they the cause of his psychopathy? Or did they just make something that was already there worse? It's impossible to say for sure, but it's very possible, likely even, that it was both. Like this perfect storm of nature and nurture that created Ted Bundy.
And even with all that, there's this side of him that was so in control, so calculated. He was able to function, even thrive for a long time. And this is where that whole successful psychopath thing comes in, right? Can you talk a bit more about what that means?
Of course. The thing is, not every psychopath ends up, in prison or acting out in obvious ways. Some of them, like Bundy, are highly what we call conscientious, organized, detail-oriented. They can maintain this facade of normalcy. They blend right in.
So it's like the very things that made him so dangerous, being smart, charismatic, planning everything out, those things are also what let him get away with it for so long.
Exactly. That ability to compartmentalize, to separate who he was on the inside from who he pretended to be, it was key, both as a predator and as a fugitive.
That's scary to think about. How many others are out there just like him, hiding in plain sight? We'll be right back to keep going deeper into this, the details of Bundy's crimes and, the impact he had and still has on society. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're still trying to wrap our heads around Ted Bundy.
And as we get further into this, I think it's important to remember, behind all of this, the headlines, the psychology, these were real women with lives, families, and their lives were cut tragically short.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's easy to get caught up in the Bundy of it all and forget that real people were hurt, were killed.
Yeah, exactly. Each of them, Linda, Donna, Susan, Janice, Denise, so many others, they had names, stories, futures, and those were stolen from them. And their stories, I think, they remind us how real this danger is. Predators like Bundy, they're out there in the shadows, using our trust, our vulnerability against us.
It's a hard truth to swallow for sure. And it gets, even harder to process when we look at how depraved some of his crimes were. You mentioned before that he would go back to where he put the bodies. And then there's that whole thing about him keeping the skulls like trophies.
Yeah.
What would drive someone to do that?
It's a question that, it still bothers investigators, psychologists, everyone really. Bundy himself, he gave all sorts of explanations, none of them good, obviously. Sometimes he'd say it was like a morbid fascination with death. Other times, this need for control, even after death.
He even used that word possession, right? Like he thought he still owned them somehow, even after everything.
Exactly. He talked about this feeling of ownership over them, as if killing them wasn't enough. And it's chilling, to say the least. It shows a complete lack of empathy, a mind that finds power, control, in the worst possible way.
It's just monstrous. And then there's that whole thing with Bundy and his claims about pornography. He actually blamed it, said it fueled his fantasies and then, his crimes. So what's the deal with that? Is there really a link between pornography and violence, especially in a case this extreme?
Well, Bundy's claims, they really set off this huge debate about pornography and whether it causes violence. And it's tricky. There are no easy answers. We have to be careful how we approach it. Some studies, they do show a connection, like between violent pornography and aggressive behavior. But others, they say the link is weak or it's not there at all. To just focus on pornography, though, it ignores other things that could be way more important. Mental illness, childhood trauma, even just, how society views women. All that plays a role.
So it's not as simple as pornography equals violence.
Definitely not. I mean, we can't ignore that violent media can be harmful, but to blame Bundy's crimes just on that's a huge oversimplification. It downplays his own issues, his need for control, his psychopathy, and it ignores the bigger problem, which is, the way our culture treats women and how that contributes to violence against them.
Yeah, no, it's a huge issue with, like you said, no easy answers. Switching gears a bit, I'm kind of curious, how do you think Bundy's case would be different today? Like, with all the technology, forensic science, everything we have now that they didn't back then. His crimes happened before DNA databases, before all the profiling techniques, even just how fast we can share information now.
It's an interesting thing to think about for sure. Imagine if they had DNA technology back then. Bundy left evidence, traces of himself at so many crime scenes. Hair, fibers, bite marks, all that. With today's tech, they could have matched him to those crimes, probably much sooner. And who knows how many lives that could have saved.
And what about, like, how police departments work together now? I read that Bundy, he took advantage of the fact that they weren't really talking to each other back then, the different states.
Oh, absolutely. Back in the 70s, police departments, they were silos, basically. No national databases, no instant communication, no way to quickly share information about suspects across state lines. So Bundy, he could be in one state, do what he did, and be long gone before anyone put it all together.
It's crazy to think that something as simple as, like, a phone call or a shared computer system could have made such a difference.
It really shows how far we've come in fighting crime since then. We've got fingerprints, online databases, they can even analyze social media now, all sorts of tools to catch criminals.
So you're saying that someone like Bundy, targeting strangers, relying on trickery, they'd have a way harder time today?
Without a doubt. Now, nothing's foolproof, and there are always new challenges, but yeah, technology, cooperation, it's made a huge difference.
Well, that's at least a little reassuring.
It is, but we can't forget about Bundy's legacy. He became more than just a criminal. He became like this weird cultural phenomenon. People are fascinated by him, and that's something we need to talk about too.
Yeah, you're right. Even now, all these years later, people are still obsessed with Ted Bundy. Books, documentaries, movies, it's like he never really went away. And so when we come back, we're going to dig into that. Bundy's impact on pop culture and why we're still so captivated by him. And we are back trying to, make sense of it all, I guess, with Ted Bundy. We've talked about a lot, his whole deal, the charm, the brutality, what might have been going on in his head. But then there's this other question, right? Like, why are we still so obsessed with him? It's been years, decades, and yet Ted Bundy is still, like, a thing.
Yeah, it's a question that, well, it never really goes away, does it? Why do people like Bundy? Why do they capture our imaginations like this? Why are we so drawn to true crime, to these stories, when they're so dark?
It's like, when you can't look away from something, even though it's awful.
Exactly, and I think, well, part of it is just how awful it is, The things Bundy did, it's a level of darkness that most of us can't even comprehend, and yet we're drawn to it, we want to understand it, even though maybe we shouldn't.
And there's that whole thing about how normal he seemed, right?
Yeah.
Handsome, smart, he could talk his way out of anything. That just made him more famous, didn't it? Gave the media even more to latch onto.
Oh, absolutely, and it makes you think about, the ethics of it all, how we, like as a society, how we portray serial killers, especially now with true crime everywhere. Are we, even by accident, making violence seem, glamorous? Are we exploiting the victims by telling their stories through the lens of the people who hurt them?
It's a tough one, for sure. Trying to explore these cases, but not make them into entertainment. To talk about the horror, but not celebrate the people who caused it.
Exactly, and it all comes back to, well, never forgetting about the victims.
They're the ones we should be talking about, remembering. The real people with real lives, whose lives were cut short.
And their stories, they remind us that this stuff, it's not just in movies, it's real. And we have to learn from it, trying to make sure it happens less,
So as we finish this deep dive, I think the big question is, could a Bundy happen today? Could someone like him do what he did in this day and age?
That's what we've been trying to figure out, haven't we? And honestly, there's no easy answer. But I do think with all the advancements, the science, the way we communicate, it would be much harder for someone like him to hide for so long.
That's something, at least. But it also means we can't let our guard down, right? We have to trust our gut. Pay attention to those red flags, even the small ones.
You got it. Because evil, it doesn't always look how we think it should. Sometimes it's charming, it's familiar, and that's what makes it so dangerous.
Yeah, no, that's a lot to think about for sure. Well, to everyone listening, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Ted Bundy. It's been, well, I don't know if enjoyable is the right word, but hopefully you learned something. Maybe you see the case differently now, or just, think about true crime in a new way. Whatever it is, just remember those victims. They're the ones who really matter. Well, until next time, Everyone, stay safe out there.